the thing to
The
tell me it
recording
started to
light.
record.
Well, the notification to come on, yeah.
There we go. All righty. Right. I'm Vijay Solanki, and I'm joined today by um, an executive who has also worked in the audio industry, but broke away from it and has found fame in making the Fear and Greed podcast a success. Adam Lang. Adam, lovely to see you.
Lovely to see you too, Vijay. Thank you for having me on.
Fantastic. So we want to pick your brains and get your insights and your sage-like advice for media founders as part of the cohort I'm working with, but also the broader community. So let's get straight into it. It would be great I know a little bit about you, but I think most of my cohort won't. So a little bit of your backstory will be a really good start.
Okay. um, 53 years of age, Vijay, father of two, husband to one, and moved to Sydney from Perth almost 30 years ago. And having done a Bachelor of Economics and paid my way to do that by running a pub, I moved
Right.
to Sydney to get into the music business and was fortunate to start working for Chris Murphy, who managed INXS. And that kicked off 12 years in the music business. Then I worked in television for a while, worked for Channel 10 in 2004 to 2007, and then into radio. And radio, I guess, is much more progressively called audio now. I finished in 2019, at the end of 2019, as the Chief Executive Officer of Macquarie Media Limited. And that was a publicly listed company, but at that time had been bought out by Channel 9, Nine Entertainment. And when that was absorbed, that's when I left. And so I found myself with 6 months of gardening leave, during which time COVID hit and changed a few things in the media landscape. And I got together with two other people that I used to work with in different capacities. One called Sean Aylmer, who is the editorial director at Fairfax, looking after Sydney Morning Herald, The Age, the Canberra Times, and a whole fleet of journalists. And Michael Thompson, who at the time had been the head of content at Macquarie Media, Ray Hadley's former producer, who was just so good at his job. When I got to work with him, I was both grateful and knew that I had to promote him quickly. And so when I left there and he left as well, Sean and Michael and I all got together and we thought there was space for a podcast in this new audio landscape. And so we created one.
So how did you kind of get to that conclusion, and how do you decide on the topic and the subject of the podcast?
Sure. So I don't think I'm the common denominator, but I seem to have had a history of only working for industries in disruption. So when I was in the music business, I was there when Napster came along. And when you're selling albums, records, CDs, even tapes, and something called Napster comes along and makes it free, it's really hard to compete with free. And that industry changed a lot, the recorded music industry. So that was disrupted. Then I went to television and Channel 10, and television became disrupted in this new digital realm. And then into radio, excuse me, sorry, then into radio and worked for Austereo, which became Southern Cross Austereo, and then into talk radio. And we could see that both in Fairfax Radio Network, as it was then, newspapers were being heavily disrupted. And Radio 2 was showing those signs where linear broadcast, that one to many, was starting to sway in favour of that digital, that one-to-one distribution. And so when I left Macquarie Media, the history of disruption that I'd seen, digital disruption of music, digital disruption of television, digital disruption of radio toward audio, I thought that technology shift is only going to continue. So let's try and be part of that. Second was when I was going to work at Macquarie Media and driving to work, I thought, wouldn't it be great if ... And thought process for me was, could I get someone to read the Financial Review, the Australian, the Wall Street Journal, the Times, get all the business information I needed to know, condense that down and tell me on the way to work? And I couldn't find it. And so I got together with Sean and Michael, and we thought, there was space for a podcast to do that for a commuter going to work, someone who wanted to know about what was going on in the world of business, to give them that utility and give it for free in a really succinct way, but also one that was good to listen to. You didn't just want to be, I really should listen to that worthy content. You wanted to make it up-tempo and interesting and engaging so that people would want to come back for more and make it part of their habit. So we got together and Sean was taking me through a presentation of all of the articles online that had been the most popular in 2019. So there was, if you can imagine, a list of the top 20 from the Australian, the ABC, Fairfax, and how many people downloaded or viewed those articles. And was it crime? Was it politics, business, sports, celebrity? What was it, gossip, that really drove the topic? And there was nothing clear to me in that top 20 that any one genre was more dominant than another. And so I said to Sean, so what was it that drove these articles, one to be more successful than another? And he said, well, it's great journalism, of course. I said, yes, apart from that, what was it? And he said, well, I tell you, when we were wondering what to put on the front page of a newspaper, it was always go with fear and greed. I said, that's a great name for a podcast. And so, those primal elements that we know we all have, we want to hopefully not be fearful or full of greed. We want to operate somewhere in between. But I thought, well, that's a good name for a business podcast.
And you had that before you created any content?
Yeah. And so there were these floating ideas, and that discussion helped really synthesize what we wanted to do. And then it was those whiteboard sessions that I'm sure so many of us, you and I certainly are familiar with it, and the viewing audience now no doubt will be too, where you go, blank canvas. It's both a beautiful and terrifying thing at the same time, where you go, okay, well, what could it be? And that took several iterations to take shape. We decided on how long should it be, what content should we cover, breaking it down, what the structure was, how often should we do it, and it really set in place, I guess, between February and May 2020. I came off gardening leave at the end of April 2020, and so we launched in May, and that's now been nearly 2.5 years, and we've grown from literally that petrifying moment of download zero, when you launch your first one, through to now doing in excess of an average of 20,000 a day. And the challenges of growing that content and how to make money from that content and operate profitably have all been, as I think lots of startups are, is test and learn your way through it.
I'm gonna dive into that, but before I do,
Sure.
just a little bit more color and depth of, because I think what I'm seeing with a lot of founders is they're really interested in that journey to the idea and the number of sessions or the type of iterations. Was it time? Were there nirvana moments? Like, how did you get from this notion of there's a kind of news commuter podcast to like to fear and greed, and then the actual content? What did that look like in a little bit more detail?
Sure. So, those first, I guess it's that storming, forming, and norming, and that is not a straight line process. It's not entirely predictable and it's not smooth. It goes in fits and starts, and that was true of this process. So, we started out with a notion of 20 minutes, about 15 minutes of news and a 5-minute interview once a day, and thought that would be good. So when do we have to do that? Okay, it's got to be baked fresh every morning. So that means getting up at 4, having a lot of the content prepared the night before, making sure you got in all the perspective that you did need to start the day, and recording and editing and launching by 6. certainly 6:30, then by 6. And so that became, okay, that was really hard. And
Physically hard and mentally hard, or?
But exactly both, because it was exhausting. You'd be doing it from a Sunday to a Friday, and then we had weekend editions. So there was an unrelenting nature to it, particularly for Sean, who wrote and presented all of the content in the early days. And then having the interview to do, we would basically beg, borrow, and steal our way to get interviews and edit 5 minutes of them to go in. So 15 minutes of news, 5 minutes of interview every day. And then we thought, oh, well, maybe the extended interview should be released too. And so we did that. And then we thought, oh, okay, later on, months into it, an afternoon edition should be done to wrap the market for the day and give people who are commuting home again just 5 minutes on what had happened that day, and obviously do it all over again. And then we brought another thing alongside it going, well, what if people don't want 15 minutes in the interview? What about if they just really want something about the length of a song, say a bit longer, 5 minutes? The Fast 5 was launched. That was, okay, we'll do 2 versions. How are we going to do that? 2 versions in the morning, 2 versions in the afternoon, and a weekend edition, and maybe a Sunday edition. And so we've tested and learned our way through. We now do 28 podcasts a week. So what we thought was one a day,
but how much?
28 a week.
How much do you think? We've got founders out there. Some have got a journalistic background, but how much do you think you were helped by your collective pedigree in news, production, journalism, and storytelling, and kind of the business of media? Like, does that give you a bit of a head or a lot of a head start?
Yeah, it's the latter. I think it was a lot of a head start. And it's a critical point, Vijay. I think you do what you love, right? And I'm a business nerd. I love business news, and to me, the call to arms is really, we want to help our listeners get better at business. Whatever their business is, we want to help them get better. And
right. So
we do
that by that's your value prop then.
Totally.
That's brilliant. Did you have that quite early on, or
that was at the start? Because having worked in everything from a pub to a record label to music publishers to working for myself to big companies, I'm really passionate about the virtue of business. I think it tests you, it tests your character, and it tests your intellect on how you can use everything you've got to create a business that's worthwhile, to create value where none existed before, right? And hopefully employ people too. That's a good thing. That's not just relying on the people who've created businesses before us or the government. That's me doing what I want to do, which is I want to create one, preferably more than one, but at least I want to create one that it can be sustained and employ people. And so that to help others do that.
You've always had that burning desire. That's almost palpable as you're speaking. I can
yeah,
feel the emotion and the passion.
Oh no, I'm committed to it. It's definitely from within. I'm very lucky. I got brought up in a wonderful, loving family, and by hardworking, value-driven people. And so my role modeling was great. Do that, and then if I can do that and create opportunities for myself, for my family through that, wonderful. That's virtuous. But if I can do it and help others do it, that's even more affirming for me. I get a lot of gratitude and gratification out of that. So, committing to a business that helped others do business better, it was like, yeah, let's do it. And that to me is a really good binding agent. And so, to your point about where we came from, learning all those things that I've learned along the way, and Sean the same, Michael the same, they are really important. So the first thing is do what you love, because you will actually have so much of it within you that is good to bring value to the company that you're in, but also the skills that you have and how you bring them all together. Because in the founder state, you're doing everything. Like, I built a website badly, but at least it was a website,
I know that feeling.
At least it was function. And I did a spreadsheet for cash books badly until we got enough money to get a Xero subscription, and an accountant. And you do all these things because you have to, needs must. You're doing it really to bootstrap the whole thing and retain as much equity as you can. But all of the skills count immensely. So Sean's skills as a journalist are invaluable. Michael's skills as a producer and I guess as a person are invaluable. And I think my sort of business operations side that I've learnt along the way from small to large businesses has been invaluable too. But all of it, can exist in parallel. The way you bring it all together is really interesting. So when you have more than one person, more than one founder, how you operate together and how you commit to each other through the entity you're working in is really important. They're essentials.
And you not worked together as a trio before, is that correct?
No, we
Or had you?
hadn't.
Right.
So Sean, he and I were kind of on similar levels. I was running the radio companies. He was running, as I said, editorial director of a number of the most significant mastheads in the country. But he's also been a Walkley award-winning journalist. Michael had been a producer with Ray Hadley, won many awards. And as I said, I worked with him. He and I worked together at Macquarie Media. And so, but the three of us had not worked together. And the entity, as I said, did not exist before.
So how was that journey of three super smart, accomplished guys learning? Clearly, when you describe it, it's almost like you're describing areas of expertise, but you're in a startup, you've all got ideas, probably got strong wills. How did you get that to work?
Well, I think, this is where competence and character both come in equal measure. And you've got to be really careful to nurture both of them as you're doing this, because doing something as a startup, it puts both of those things under a lot of pressure, which ultimately can break you in terms of the working relationships. And it can also, as an added, I guess, observation, during COVID, when you're all doing it remotely, you're not with each other. You don't learn from each other by osmosis. Oh, Sean's doing this at this time. I'll leave him alone. Or now he just seems to need a chat. Let's chat. Or Michael the same. You don't see that. It's not in sight and in mind. And so doing it in virtual circumstance is really interesting too. So it just takes care. I shouldn't say just. It takes care. That's and I guess the foundation stone of respecting what each other bring, both as their competence and their character, but also knowing that the binding agent between you needs to be nurtured. You need to look after each other, look out for and after each other.
Was that implicit? Or is that something you discussed up front?
No, look, probably the answer is it's a bit of both, really. Some things were implicit, and because we all knew each other, it wasn't assumed knowledge. It had already been experienced. Like I knew they were both great people. I knew I would want to work with them again in a heartbeat. So those parts were like I knew that of their character already. I knew their competence. So I knew a lot. We each knew quite a bit, enough about each other. But when it's hard to know when each of you is feeling pressure in different ways, and it's also hard to know how each of us is coming across. Self-awareness is a delicate thing. It's you can have a certain amount of it, but the perspective of others is incredibly important too. And so it does, some of it was implicit and some of it was not. Some of it was like, hey, let's chat about X, Y, and Z. And of course, given my operational nature, wouldn't surprise you to know, Vijay, that recently we had our quarterly operations meeting to go through a whole range of things to make sure that we check in on those things. And we used to check in additionally twice a week in little ops calls. Now it's just once a week. But being clear on roles and responsibilities and being clear on when you know to put your hand up is when, even if you're thinking about putting your hand up for a discussion, put it up. Let's have a chat. So that I guess there's a certain operational rhythm that we've made sure that we're attending to the relationships between us and the responsibilities that need doing. But there's also that understanding is, hey, if I see something that I think is not, not being discussed well enough between us, I'll say so, and you've got to do the same. And that's how we can help to keep it in really good territory.
Wow. So it sounds like there's historic mutual respect, some experience of working together, and you've set what feels like a really respectful framework for collaboration.
I think so. I hope so.
Mm.
And it's, that discipline of having a rhythm helps with that, because we know
Yeah.
on X day of the week, on X day of the quarter, we will be talking about these things. We know that's happening. That's part of our habits.
Do you
And
think
then
do you think
each day we're
operating
recording.
rhythm do you think operating rhythm is particularly important in media
Oh,
companies because they haven't their natural heartbeat of how they churn out content? So do you think it's just implicit again in a startup that you've got to work and connect other things to that rhythm?
I think that's right. I think it has a place in every company, and indeed in my personal life. If I, do certain things, fitness, well-being, meditation, I'll be better when I do them. And so I put them in my operating rhythm, if you like. And as a business, it's the same no matter what it is. I wonder too, though, when you've got a really public-facing business like the immediacy of media, music, television, radio, etc., that you get marked, you get your card marked every day by what the audience is doing with your repertoire. Is your content being accepted? Is it growing? Is it not? And so you are very public facing, and I expect that feels a little different than other businesses. So that might be uncommon, but to us, the operating rhythm, we need to have it. It starts with our audience is expecting the podcast to be there every day at these times, and so
Yeah.
we've got to hit that beat. And in terms of our operations around it to support it, to me, it makes complete sense to have that operating rhythm. And as a person, I'm better off when I have those disciplines in place. They give me the freedom to do the minimum plus more.
It was great to dive into the people and the connections and the relationships, but I want to pull back for the
Mm.
last few minutes to the product. So two questions really. One, when did you know you were onto something? What did that look like? Was it a feeling? Was it research? Was it a number? Um, and the second thing, in relation to product development, kind of the biggest lessons you've learned, you might want to call them mistakes or learning points, depending on how you
Mm.
see the world. But those two things I'd love to hear a bit more
Okay.
about.
So when did we know? For the first, we've been going for a bit over, nearly 2.5 years. So for the first 2 years, we used to joke perpetually that one day this might turn into a real business. And look, it has now. And so we accepted that. The point at which it became that was, I said, the high, medium, and low scenarios. If we get to 100,000 downloads a month, we've got something that's got a pulse. Right? If we get to 500,000 downloads a month, we've got a good business. If we
Yeah.
get to 1 million downloads a month, we've got a very good business. And that's the aspiration, is to get to 1 million downloads a month. So we started out with obviously download zero and knew that there were those gates, broadly speaking, along the way. And as we hit them, we said, oh, okay, well, we've got to stage one now. We've got a pulse, or we're now a good business.
So when
So
did you know
we've
you
done,
had a pulse? What did that look or
well,
feel
yeah,
like?
it was 100,000 downloads a month was the target. So, okay, because at that point I thought we had enough of an audience to be a salient consideration to advertisers. Below that, you just, oh, well, whatever. You're not, yeah, they're good numbers, but they're not very compelling. But if you're reaching an audience that's interested in business, um, people who typically invest in themselves, invest in other things, are looking to, invest their money, their time, their efforts into lots of things. So that's an attractive audience to advertisers, and they're not always easy to get. So at 100,000 downloads a month, that was enough of an offering to prospective advertisers. Of course, between 0 and 100,000, you are scrapping. you're bootstrapping without any cash really. And
were you bringing in any revenues between 0 and 100,000?
Yeah, tiny bit. So, and this goes to the product development. Is we did some commissioned work, so produced podcasts for other people, and on a fee base. And you learn, geez, that was so helpful because that got us some money in making content for other people on a fee basis before we had enough to get advertisers in Fear and Greed. It was really hard work, but frankly, because we were new on the block, we sold ourselves pretty cheaply to do it. But it gave us some cash. It was a lifeline. So product development, yeah, we test and learn. We'll do that work, but not at that rate anymore. So we're beyond someone to be discovered now. We've got a reasonable brand name and bona fides in the realm, so we should be able to charge reasonably for that service. So, but we knew that was an acceptable way to start. I think we learned too around how different distribution channels work differently. So, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon, etc. Apple and Spotify are the biggest in that order, and you've got to really work with them to make sure that your content is palatable and maybe even featured by them, because that can guarantee you a very different chance than without it. And so we developed the Fast Five to be about the length of a song, a bit longer. So that, say if you were listening amongst music in Apple or Spotify or others, that, oh, that podcast is not like an hour. It's quite fast. It's gone in 5 minutes. So it doesn't seem too long and too out of context in a music environment. So that was definitely a test and learn our way through. So there's been a number of instances of that. Recently, a few weeks ago, we released a new podcast called How Do They Afford That? And that is based on a kind of salacious peek over the financial fence of your neighbours and saying, hang on, how come they're going on holiday? Or, well, they got a new car, and saying, well, how do they do that? And it's not so much about making money, it's about smart ways to save money. And we've partnered up Michael Thompson and with Canna Campbell, who's from Sugar Mama TV, and she's an influencer in her own right, developed off her own bat. She's a mum with 3 kids, got this huge following on Instagram and YouTube and Facebook and social media. And so Michael and she have partnered up, and she's been a licensed financial planner for 20 years. So she's not only as a mum had to learn all the hacks of financial engineering and how to save money, but she's also been a professional in that space. And so we've got so much to learn from her. So Michael asks her about a different topic each week. So that's a weekly, and it's not news-based, it's more timeless. So, whenever, like, it's how do you save money on your shopping? How do you invest for your kids? These are sort of things that are timeless and can be listened to any time. They don't just expire upon the day that they were released.
Do you always have an audience in mind when you're developing product?
Always.
Right.
Always. I mean, it has to start and virtually end there, or it will end. If there's nothing in it for the audience, there'll be nothing in it for anybody. So there has to be a utility to it. And
how do you validate that then? Is that kind of, clearly there's a lot of experience in the team, so there's a shitload of wisdom. Do you still test that? Go, well, we've got this hunch about how they might afford that.
We do. And we brought Canna and her manager Corey into it as well to say, what do you think? And we sketched out a bunch of episodes, and then we recorded them. And it was like, if I go back to the music days, like a demonstration recording.
Right.
So what does it sound like? You can't really tell someone what a piece of music sounds like. You got to at least give them an idea. And so it's like with shows, how will these two people get on? What will the chemistry be like? Well, we don't know. We've really got to do it and off Broadway. So with Fear and Greed, with Fast Five, with How Do They Afford That? We always do demonstration sessions of those, test and learn, and iterate before release. There was a good couple of weeks of rehearsals before Fear and Greed where we did all the work, which was a lot for daily podcasts, and released none of them, because we had to know, okay, we've got our chops now. We've done our off-Broadway. We're ready to go.
I love that metaphor. So it's like a production. Therefore, you've got
Yeah,
to rehearse. You've got to do it in the small theatres before we put you on the big lights.
absolutely.
That's a
Yeah.
really clever metaphor. That's brilliant.
Well, consider like a theatrical production without a rehearsal. It would be unmitigated disaster, no matter how good they were,
How
or how good the production was.
to what extent are you scripted then with this? Is it a loose production
Oh,
schedule? Is it quite tightly scripted?
different. So there is a base script, and then it is ad lib around it. And so, particularly with the business news, you've got a lot of facts and figures, and
Mm.
they are not easy to recall accurately. And because of we need to be accurate, and so that is all there. But then the ad libbing around it, there's no script for that. That's reliant on the chemistry between Michael and Sean. And with Canna and Michael, and how do they afford that? It's only part scripted, like very minimally. The questions are known, and they've each thought about what they're going to ask and what the answers are going to be. But it is less scripted because of the different nature of that content.
Wow.
Then we've done other ones. We did this podcast called Safe Word for a while, which is basically the three founders, me, Michael, and Sean, getting stuck into each other, which was almost completely unscripted. It was mayhem and good
Brilliant.
fun.
I think we're almost out of time, so I've just got hopefully time for one more question,
Sure.
which is really around the business model.
Mm.
Is it and it's fascinating. I've heard a few times founders in media doing consulting or doing other production work to get money in the door to then survive or to feed into the startup. But what was your thinking around how Fear and Greed would make money, and yeah, how have you gone about cracking that nut?
Sure. So going back to its purpose was to help other people, help our listeners be better at business. And therefore, we wanted to keep it free. And that means advertisers support it. And so if I go back to when I was a economics student at University of Western Australia in the late 80s, I would have loved to have had something like this, for free. Yeah, I'll listen to a few ads because often they're really interesting businesses. But I couldn't afford a subscription to the Financial Review or a newspaper, and there was no internet. But in this current context, because of the wealth of information, the cost is not subscriptions. The cost is, where do I find it? Who will do the curation for me? And so keeping it advertiser supported, which means having an audience so that people can listen for free, is really important. And so we knew then that we would have to get numbers to get advertisers to be able to live. Proof of concept was getting to stages 1, 2, and hopefully 3. So 100,000 to 500,000 to 1 million downloads a month. And
Who
so
and who are
that
you
was
selling to?
known.
Are you selling direct? You're selling via agencies or
Both.
programmatically?
And yeah, both. So we've got an arrangement in place with Nova Entertainment, and it's honestly a fantastic partnership. They support us in so many ways, including commercial sales, predominantly to agencies, because they've got in excess of 100 people engaging with those big clients that go to agencies around the country. And I do direct. And the way that typically works is because we've got so many listeners and interviewees who are operators, founders, decision makers at businesses. It makes sense for me to attend to any marketing needs that they have. And so, I do the direct side of the business as well.
Fantastic. Well,
Mm.
there's so many more questions. I feel like I've got to do an episode 2 if I can twist your arm down the track, but this is probably a
That would
good.
be welcome.
Oh, you're very kind. No, super. So many gems in this. One, I didn't know you worked on INXS. I kind of thought I knew you, and clearly I didn't. So, right through to some of those theatre production metaphors and the
Yeah.
importance of doing that. I think that's a valuable lesson for any media founder that's out there. Adam, thank you so much for your time.
Oh, I'm very grateful, Vijay. Thank you for having me.
No worries. Thank you.